Alright guys, I'm the Kodiak, and today we return with our analysis of the Grand League Dynasty startup draft that happened May 25th or 24th, I believe. I can't remember right now. I'm joined here with Eryk, who was on the Round 1 recap, another member of the Grand League, and we're back to break down Round 2. Say what's up, Eryk.
What's going on, guys? Here to break down Round 2 of Grand League.
Yeah,
Huge draft. I sadly didn't have a pick in this round, though.
Yeah, and Yoav cannot join us today. He's out doing something else right now. All right. Without going any further, so pick 201 in this draft was held by Kevin. He had the 14-15 turn. His first round pick was Nick Chubb. Good pick, no issues with this. His second round pick was Julio Jones. You know, this is just a pick I would personally not have made. We're going to go over the receivers that were taken in the second round like a little later. This is just not a pick I would have made. I mean, the thing about Dynasty is that people think about it in a 3-year window. Like, if you completely, I just wouldn't have made this pick because I don't know if Julio Jones is going to be, at the top of his game for at least 3 more years. Yeah, in season long, he's probably a late first round pick. Or no, not even a late first round pick. Probably a mid-second at best, but yeah.
He probably goes around where he was taken in this draft in season long.
Yeah.
I mean, a big 14-team league, he was the 15th overall pick in the draft. You think in a 12-team league, that's right around the turn, maybe early to mid-second round.
Oh, yeah. So, either way, yeah, I think Julio Jones is still good. I think he's viable for this year. I would not have taken him at the 201, even in PPR, in a startup draft.
Yeah, and in PPR leagues, Julio Jones actually was the wide receiver 3 on the season. Missed one game. I think it was week 17 if he sat out that week or something like that when the Falcons, because they were not good. It may have been a midseason Julio Jones type injury.
I'm going to interrupt you. I remember it was actually during my bye week when we were playing last year, so I think it was...
Oh, yeah, it was. The bye week of the... I remember that because you were like, oh, yeah, Julio Jones... Because you took him at the 108 last year or something like that.
And I didn't care that he was sitting out because I had already clinched the 3 seed, but still.
The bye weeks in big league last year with the 10-man playoffs. Don't get me started. But Julio was the wide receiver 3, so he was really good. And the 2 wide receivers that finished above him last year were taken in the first round of this Grand League draft. So I can see how you might think that Julio would be that next best wide receiver. Kevin already took Nick Chubb in the end of the first. Personally, you said you wouldn't make the pick. I would have hammered another running back here at the turn as well. But as you say, not a bad pick. He should be up there, top 5 wide receiver for the next year, maybe 2, maybe even 3. But once you get past that, it's Julio's going to be 34, 35. And we know how he athletically just is head and shoulders above most cornerbacks. Mm-hmm. Is he still going to be that guy when he's 34, 35? Probably not, especially with Calvin Ridley emerging, probably going to be the wide receiver 1 in that offense pretty soon. So good season-long pick around there, but not a very good dynasty pick, especially when you see the guys going after him. And the guy who went right after him, a running back who is only 24, just inked a pretty big contract extension, Austin Ekeler at the 202.
Yeah, and the thing about Austin Ekeler is that Phillip Rivers targeted his running backs at least 32%, I think, over the course of his career. Now, with Tyrod Taylor coming in, Tyrod Taylor is a mobile quarterback. So what's a mobile quarterback's first instinct? It is not, when they're under pressure, it is not going to be to check down like Phillip Rivers was. Tyrod Taylor is going to look to tuck and run. I mean, I don't know anything about Herbert. I honestly don't know if he checks down or not. I know that he has made some pretty irresponsible decisions in the past. Whether he's a good quarterback or not, I don't know. But what I do know is that the Chargers usually have always featured receiving back in their game plan. And Austin Ekeler is currently that guy. Austin Ekeler last year in PPR was the RB4. He was not an expensive pick. I think he was going around I mean, we both did the perfect draft challenge today, and I think he was ranked 73rd or 74th last year. So if
you could get him 7th, 8th round.
Yeah, so if you draft him in the 5th or 6th, you hit a home run. There's not really much else to say.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Philip Rivers loves to target those backs out of the backfield. Even Melvin Gordon, when he was healthy and when he was not holding out, would get a quite significant amount of receiving work out of that backfield, even with Ekeler there. So we'll see how Tyrod Taylor, maybe Justin Herbert in there. They're both tons more athletic than Philip Rivers ever has been. So they're going to probably be tucking and running. But, I mean, Ekeler, you think he's going to be the lead back? He should be 3 downs. I mean, we don't really know if the Chargers want to use him for 3 downs, 16 games a year, but they don't really have anyone else. I mean, Justin Jackson's not terrible, but they don't really have anyone else there to take away goal line work, take away receiving work, take away even like those 4-yard carries on the early downs that just pile up over the course of a game. So not a bad pick here by PK at all at the 202, especially considering he didn't have a first-round pick.
Yeah, and in PPR, like, I'm completely okay with this. Standard, not at all. But, you know, since it is PPR, whatever. I actually took Ekeler in the late second in my paid startup league. So at 203, Andres took DJ Moore. Now, the thing about DJ Moore is that it's pretty hard to find anyone in the Dynasty community or, like, even in the real-life football community that does not like this guy. Film grinders love him. Stat nerds love him. It's just because he's an athletic freak, and he got 1,150 yards or somewhere, like something around that, I believe, last year. And he had Kyle Allen as his quarterback. Now, I completely understand that the Carolina Panthers offense last year was just force-feed McCaffrey, and they went 5-11, so they were a horrible football team. But, you know, I think DJ Moore this is probably, I would definitely, if I was looking for a receiver, I would feel comfortable taking Moore here, because I mentioned in the last video, like, after Michael Thomas, you could probably have Moore, Godwin, Adams, Hopkins in any order you want. I love the DJ Moore pick here for Andres. I think he's going to be good, even with Teddy Bridgewater, because all he's done is produce.
Yeah, I love DJ Moore. I took him last year. I was on the DJ Moore hype train last year. I took him, I think, with the last pick of the 4th round last year, and it paid off.
Yeah,
probably more than any of my other picks did all of last year. He was not the most consistent guy week to week. He's not like a target hog going to get 8 to 10 targets every week and just put up consistent production. But when he went out there in PPR and had like a 9-catch, 120 yards and a touchdown type of game, you gotta just love that. And I think, yeah, as you mentioned, Kyle Allen was his quarterback last year, and now that he's emerged as
garbage.
Kyle Allen is not a good quarterback. I don't think anyone's arguing that. The only worst situation was probably the Steelers quarterbacks, and that's kind of a toss-up, I guess. But yeah, with Teddy Bridgewater, accurate quarterback, loves to find his guys underneath. I mean, you could even maybe DJ Moore. He's not. I don't think he's that small either.
No,
I think he's
like,
6 foot.
He's 6 foot, like 200, 210. So like these guys coming into the NFL, they're like not your prototypical big dudes like Megatron. They're not your like Tyreek Hills. They're just your well-built athletic freaks.
Yeah, and DJ Moore's really quick.
Yeah.
Like
I said, his athletic profile is just insane.
Yeah, he's so yards after the catch on like a Michael Thomas-esque slant route. We saw Teddy Bridgewater do that a lot when he was playing with the Saints last year. DJ Moore could go off this year.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Maybe not the biggest red zone target, but I could see him going north of 1,300, 1,400 yards. Maybe add a little bit of rushing work in there too with Matt Rule coming in as the offensive coordinator. The ceiling's the limit for him.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned with Matt Rule and Joe Brady coming in, Justin Jefferson was great in the red zone. Jamar Chase was great in the red zone. So they are going to figure out how to get the ball to their playmakers. The best passing options on that team are not Robbie Anderson. They're DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey, and Curtis Samuel, probably in that order. They are going to get the ball to those guys, and in a PPR league, that is just invaluable. And another guy who's definitely going to get the ball is Davante Adams. Now, I'm going to let Eryk actually start this one off because he ended up trading for Davante Adams, I think 2 months after we did the startup draft. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was a while ago. I initially made, I mean, we know how bad Tom is at trading sometimes. So I was
Yeah.
able to acquire a bunch of great players from him, including Mixon, who is actually the next pick we'll be able to talk about in a bit. But I got Adams, or I got, sorry, not got Adams. I got DeAndre Hopkins in a trade. And I love DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, another target hog that we talked about in the first round video, great player. But the more I thought about it and the more I actually looked at the stats, I mean, switching to sleeper, it just gives you a lot more to just look at in terms of snap count, targets. I just saw Davante Adams and I offered Hopkins and my third round pick, which I think will probably be one of the last picks in our rookie draft when we have it, so not that valuable.
Yeah.
But I mean, a third round pick in our league isn't going to be extremely valuable anyway. But looking at Davante Adams' stats last year, he had 2 weeks when he was healthy where he didn't get at least 8 targets, and only 4 weeks last season where he didn't get above 10 targets. And if you're getting 10 targets, you could do anything with those targets. I mean, it's amazing. So trading for him, I absolutely love Davante Adams. And I'm pretty sure, looking back at the stats year to year, he was way down on his touchdowns last year. And obviously, Aaron Rodgers, I think, how new was Jimmy Graham to the Packers?
I honestly can't remember.
Was it last year, 2 years? Yeah, I can't even remember.
He's irrelevant at this point.
I don't know who was taking those red zone targets. Maybe it was Aaron Jones's rushing attempts, but
yeah,
I mean, Adams missed 4 weeks last year and had 8 fewer touchdowns than he did last year. So I don't see any reason why those numbers shouldn't go up, as well as obviously being healthy for 15, 16 weeks, why his receiving yardage, normal numbers like that shouldn't also go up. So I expect a huge year from Davante Adams, and he's only 27, which is the same age as Hopkins. So not like a Julio Jones who's already 31. He should be producing at the NFL level for quite a bit longer.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I remember Davante Adams not getting all those touchdowns last year because I was unfortunately the owner of Davante Adams. Last year, I actually ended up trading Marlon Mack for Davante Adams. I think right after he got hurt because I had the depth to keep Adams stashed on my bench. The guy who wanted Mack did not, and he ended up flipping him for Chubb. But yeah, regardless, that's neither here nor there. I think Davante Adams is going to have a great year this year because the Packers, let's be honest, they have nobody else. And the funny thing is, the reason Aaron Jones was the RB2 last year, he undoubtedly benefited from Davante Adams being out of the lineup. Aaron Jones got most of his receiving work without Davante Adams in the lineup. I mean, the receiving split with and without Davante Adams in the lineup is insane. Because, like I said, they have no one. And let's be honest, the offense in Green Bay didn't get much better this year. They drafted Jordan Love in the first, which does not affect Adams at all, at least for this year, or at least it shouldn't. They drafted A.J. Dillon in the second, which I think, to be honest, it helps Adams. Because A.J. Dillon, he's terrible at receiving. He can't catch. And then they drafted Josiah DeGuara, I think, in the third round, who's a fullback. So they added absolutely nothing. Davante Adams is a hog. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 no matter what. And I think he's poised for a big, big year.
Yeah, and by wide receiver 1, you mean wide receiver 1 on the Packers, obviously. But
yeah,
no reason to think that he can't put up Michael Thomas-like numbers if he's healthy. I mean, the two of them are pretty far above the third place in terms of that target share statistic, at least when the two of them are healthy. Both of them have around 30% of their team's target share, which is absolutely huge for that receiving floor, just getting targets, getting receptions. And again, it is a PPR league.
And
but
another thing is that I actually had, I think the only 2 receivers I would take in the first round this year are Michael Thomas and Davante Adams. And I had a 16-team draft, I think, 2 days ago, which, 16 teams, you heard that correctly. I think I took Davante Adams at the 116 and paired him with Mixon at the 201. So we're about to talk about these guys. Take it away, Eryk.
Yeah, that's huge. Joe Mixon, another player who members of Grand League can attest to my absolutely loving. Another player who I traded for after the draft, after you traded him to Tom for Kenyan, Drake, and Kelce, who we're about to talk about in a few
I think it was
too. But
Drake and Robinson or something like that.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, the Kelce trade was different. But regardless of that, Joe Mixon was someone, along with DJ Moore, who I was absolutely huge on last year. Not someone I valued in the first round, which is sort of where he was starting to creep up to, a little bit like how Miles Sanders is this year, where like once you get into that 106, 107, 108, I'm a little bit hesitant about taking guys there. But Joe Mixon was someone who I loved at the 1-2 turn. Sadly, in Big League last year, which was the league that turned into Grand League, I had an early first-round pick. I traded down to the 110, and David Johnson was there, who was obviously a better pick than Mixon at the time. But in my other 3 leagues where I had picks late in the first round, I scooped up Mixon in all of them. And it bit me in the ass for most of last season until the playoffs, where he actually did help me in a few playoff surges. But Mixon is still someone that I absolutely love for Dynasty. I mean, beginning of the year, bad offensive line, new head coach in Zach Taylor, absolutely just terrible team from top to bottom. He was not allowed to run very often. But then in the end of the season, the Bengals were like, all right, we do not care if we're losing. We're still going to just hand the ball off to our best offensive player, that is Joe Mixon. And you saw games where he was getting 25 touches. And, I mean, if you get 25 touches, you're going to put up fantasy points. And that's what he did at the end of last season. I think he was RB4 from week 10 on to the end of the season.
Yeah,
and
something like that.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be a top 5 running back. I'm not expecting that out of him. But with Joe Burrow coming in, Jonah Williams, who was their first-round pick from last year, coming back after being out for all of last year, their offensive line should be better. I expect Joe Mixon to have a bounce back. And he wasn't even that bad last year.
I mean, yeah, he wasn't bad last year. I mean, as long as the rest of the team around him that you had was good, he definitely produced for you. If it was not, he probably sunk you because he was an expensive pick last year. And, yeah. So, a thing about Joe Mixon, I drafted him at the 205, obviously. I'm not Eryk in love with him, but I think he's still a pretty good player. You know, you mentioned at the end of the year last year, they did not care who they had in at quarterback. They were just like, okay, we just don't want to get this guy killed. We're just going to hand it to Mixon. And yeah, he started to produce. My only gripe with him in PPR, or I guess not my only gripe, but a gripe I have with him is that he has been pretty underwhelming in the passing game for how touted he was coming out of college. I mean, Mixon was phenomenal in college. He probably would have been a first-round pick in 2017, and that was a stacked running back class, remember? He probably would have been a first-round pick if he didn't punch that woman on camera. But that hasn't really...
I don't mean to laugh, but
no, it's okay.
Just a terrible decision by Mixon.
Yeah, but that really hasn't carried over to the NFL, thankfully, for his sake. But yeah, he just really hasn't gotten a lot of the passing work. And I think his passing work, actually, when he was getting fed last year, went down. But, you know, I think he's poised for a bounce back. I mean, the Cincinnati run-blocking splits, like, before and after the bye are pretty insane. The Bengals' offensive line, last year it was absolutely terrible. But after the bye, it got way better, and Jonah Williams is coming back. So, huge boost for Mixon, and obviously Joe Burrow coming in is going to help them a lot. I don't think the Bengals are going to be a good football team in 2020, but I think they're building on something good for the future.
Yeah, Mixon, not one of those guys that's going to benefit from that, like, positive team performance leading to them running the ball a lot, but as in my opinion, still their best offensive player, at least in their skill positions. I'll give credit to Joe Burrow, but he's still a rookie.
Yeah,
they're just going to feed him. And I mean, considering all that went wrong for him last year at the beginning of the season, he still finished in PPR leagues as running back 13. And if that's his floor, then anything upwards of that is just a win, because in this draft, and considering this is a dynasty draft too, in this draft he went as like RB 10, 11.
Yeah.
So anything above running back 13, which is maybe not his floor if he gets injured, which luckily he hasn't really suffered from his career so far, but he could be a top 5 running back, and if he does, that's a win. And if he's RB 10 around where he got drafted, then it's not really a loss considering where he was drafted at the 205. So I love that pick from you, and I love that he's now on my team. Moving on to the next pick, the 206. This is where we start to see the first non-running back or wide receiver. And I think Alex and I can both tell you we're huge proponents of late QB, late tight end, unless like the value is so ridiculously there. So Patrick Mahomes at the 206. It's not my favorite pick, and obviously we drafted before the Mahomes contract, and Alex, you can speak to this too, it's not a pick where it really has a chance of busting at all. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is going to be in Kansas City for 10 years.
Yeah. So in one QB, like virtually all of the research shows that quarterbacks are not valuable compared to other positions unless you're getting Peyton, Lamar, or Mahomes in 2018 production. You know, when Peyton Manning had his record-breaking year in 2013, he finished with 8 points per game more than the QB 10 on a points per game basis that year, and that was Tony Romo, I believe. So when people compare guys, the question they have to ask themselves is like what value they like a player at. Like obviously in 2013, Peyton Manning was better than Tony Romo. That's not what I'm here to debate. But was the 10 points per game difference between him and Romo worth taking him like 7 or 8 rounds earlier? Worth it when you could have taken like a more valuable position? The gap between elite quarterbacks and like mid-level quarterbacks in fantasy, unless you're playing Superflex, which this is not, is nowhere near the gap of elite running backs and mid-running backs. I mean, running backs and wide receivers matter most in one QB because good skill position players will easily make up the like top point difference between the top quarterbacks and the mid quarterbacks. Tight ends maybe, but you have to draft Kittle, Kelce, and Ertz, and Andrews maybe. And hitting on a QB late could absolutely win you a league. But man, Patrick Mahomes as a 23-year-old went 5,050. And as a Broncos fan, I can tell you that this man is literally the Antichrist. I can tell that for a long time I am going to absolutely hate this guy as a football player, which is why I took him at 102 in one of my Superflex startups, because he's just on a GOAT trajectory. Like, I'm not sure how many rings he's going to get, but he's literally a surefire Hall of Famer almost, and he's been in the league for 3 years. He has only lost 7 games in his career. Teams have shown that the only way to beat Mahomes is to keep him off the field. You can only pray that you get like a stop or two, and then you just have to absolutely cram the ball down their throat. Last year we saw in the regular season, with the Colts and the Texans, that burning clock like nobody's business is the only way to beat them. I mean, Marlon Mack, Derrick Henry, and Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson all basically had to beat the Chiefs by themselves. And also, all the teams that do beat them like 38-31, so they're still putting up points. We saw what the Chiefs can do in like such a limited time frame. They exploded in the second quarter against Houston. The margin for error when you're playing the Chiefs is like virtually non-existent. If you make a stupid mistake, Patrick Mahomes will make you pay. And regardless of everything I said, Patrick Mahomes is definitely the QB1 in Dynasty. Maybe in redraft, Lamar Jackson is QB1, but I completely believe that Patrick Mahomes is a Hall of Famer, and I think he will be worth the 206.
Yeah, a few points that you brought up there that I wanted to go over. Firstly, as a Patriots fan, from what was Patrick Mahomes, essentially his rookie year, I know he was drafted and like sat behind Alex Smith that one year, but his MVP season in the playoffs, the Patriots played a near perfect football game, and it took Dee Ford being a complete buffoon to lose the game for Patrick. Like, the Patriots played nearly a perfect football game, and they should have lost. That's how good at football Patrick Mahomes is. And I know real-life football and fantasy aren't exactly equal, but the Chiefs' entire offense revolves around them having the best quarterback talent I've ever seen, and I think anyone else has ever seen play this game. Going back to more of a fantasy perspective, you brought up the Peyton Manning getting those, whatever it was, 10 points per game over QB 10.
Romo.
Yeah, Romo that year. And that's the very rare case where I think drafting a QB in one quarterback is going to be worth it. But again, it's like, when can you predict a quarterback setting the league record in touchdowns and being 10 points per game better than the next quarterback?
Mm-hmm.
You really can't. And basing a season, I mean, and this is more season long than Dynasty, basing a season long draft pick over a record setting season that might happen is not something I can get behind. So the early quarterback, especially in one QB, really isn't the move. I think we've been harshing on this pick a little too much in terms of drafting quarterback early.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, both of us think Mahomes is generational. And in a Dynasty league, Josh, who did not have a first-round pick, is getting his fantasy quarterback for maybe longer than this league exists.
Yeah, like
so,
I think this league will be around for a long time. And for however long it exists for, I believe that Patrick Mahomes will always be in Josh's lineup.
He'll be in Josh's lineup every week except for his bye week.
Yeah, that's true.
So something to lock up there. It's huge. Now, I mean, there were running backs on the board.
Mm-hmm.
There were wide receivers on the board. But you can't really go wrong with taking Patrick Mahomes. At least he didn't take Lamar, honestly, and Lamar was taken later this round. Not a terrible pick either, but Patrick Mahomes isn't a mobile quarterback. He's not going to fall apart. His talent should potentially even get better. And 10 years down the road, I don't see why he can't be 99% of the player he is now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to bring up one thing. If you did a Dynasty startup in 2000 and you used a second round pick on Peyton Manning, I would say that even though running back is scarce, and even back then, the top wide receivers were scarce, I believe that Peyton Manning would 1,000% be worth a second round pick, even in one QB in 2000.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's no reason Patrick Mahomes can't be better than or equal to the player that Peyton Manning was fantasy-wise.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes is Peyton with mobility. All right, so at the 207, Tom took Kenyan Drake. Now, probably not a pick I would have made, but I don't hate this either. The thing about Kenyan Drake is I don't think he's that good of a football player. I really don't. But there's an argument to be made about how he was held back by Adam Gase, because when he was traded from Miami to Arizona, he was, I think, the RB4 in PPR leagues. There were 3 weeks where he had over 28 points, which is obviously huge in PPR. His first game against a very, very, very good 49ers defense on Thursday Night Football was incredible. And they transitioned into more of a run-heavy offense when they got Kenyan Drake too. And they're paying him $8 million this year, so it is very clear that Cliff Kingsbury and Steve Keim and all the Arizona executives want Kenyan Drake to become part of their game plan. Kyler Murray is this mobile quarterback, but he still threw to Kenyan Drake plenty. Kenyan Drake got a ton of passing work. And the reason I traded Mixon for Drake and Robinson was because I needed a wide receiver one, and that's what I got with Robinson. But the ceiling for Kenyan Drake in 2020 is just so high. I don't think it's ignorable. He's going in, I want to say, the late first round, early second round, which, yeah, I think that's about where he should be going. Because, like I said, his ceiling is just ridiculous in Arizona.
Yeah, and I talked about how much I love Mixon, and you not completely disagreeing with me.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of 2020 outlook, Kenyan Drake could very easily finish better than Joe Mixon. I mean, you're talking about a guy who, as you mentioned, had 3 weeks over 28 points, and the Cardinals used him in any way they could last year. It was just an incredible fantasy performance. I hated him because I was able to trade him to be my David Johnson handcuff, but David Johnson was essentially a healthy scratch for the end of last year. He was on the field but not playing, so I never really knew when to play Drake, when to play David Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sitting in the library at college trying to do homework, but keeping up with that Thursday night football game, San Francisco versus Arizona. And I had David Johnson in my starting lineup because he was supposed to come back after the Chase Edmonds week against the Giants, which I don't want to talk about either.
Yeah.
And Kenyan Drake was the star of the show. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening? But yeah, again, Kenyan Drake, his production on the Cardinals last year was insane. And you said Adam Gase, an absolutely terrible head coach, was definitely holding him back his few years in Miami. The one concern I have with Drake, especially for Dynasty, is that we've never really seen him be productive on a large scale. At Alabama, he wasn't that like Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, even Najee Harris, who we see there now. He's not that workhorse guy. He was used as a scat back, even less than Alvin Kamara was used when Mark Ingram was there. Obviously, the talent was there, but he's never really been able to be reliant on for a full season. Obviously, at the end of last year, when he got traded to Arizona, we saw how much they wanted to use him as a workhorse. I mean, he got, I think, double-digit carries in every game that last year. And once they traded for him, Kyler Murray ranked like 29th in the league in passing attempts. Mm-hmm. So they want to run the ball with Kenyan Drake, who they probably view as one of the key pieces of their offense. But he's never proven that he can't, or that he can handle a full workload for a season. So maybe in 2020, he's amazing, great running back for fantasy. They run the ball through him. But maybe he gets hurt, or maybe, and the contract runs out. He's on the last year of his contract, which we didn't talk about either, and something doesn't work out. But 2020, great player. Dynasty, I just think there's a few questions there.
Yeah, there are absolutely a few questions, but it would not surprise me if Kenyan Drake was just absolutely terrible, does not do anything, just completely screws over anybody who drafted him in the late first, early second. It would not surprise me if we see him finish as like the RB6, RB7. So we'll see with that. At the 208, now Tom had back-to-back picks, and he took Travis Kelce at the 208. I don't necessarily hate this pick. There were wide receivers and running backs on the board, like we mentioned with the Mahomes pick. But I mean, yeah, I don't hate the Kelce pick here. He just got an extension too, which boosts his dynasty stock a little bit. But yeah, Travis Kelce, this isn't tight end premium, also, you have to remember. But I think I would have gone with George Kittle here personally. George Kittle was taken 3 picks after, just because of the age thing. But Travis Kelce is like 30, 31, I can't remember off the top of my head. But he still should be a very productive fantasy tight end for a long time. And, having a matchup advantage with tight end could go a really long way. You're not really going to have a disadvantage with Kelce in your lineup against anyone except for when you play the Kittle owner, probably. Patrick Mahomes is in trouble. Who does he throw it to? He throws it to the 6'5", 260 tight end. And I mentioned this in the video where we talked about the Kelce and Kittle extensions. I have seen in the AFC West, Travis Kelce absolutely destroy us. So I know what he's purely capable of. He still destroys us. But yeah, like I said, Mahomes is in trouble. Who does he go to? He goes to the 4-year, $57 million man. Yeah,
and obviously you mentioned that there were running backs, wide receivers still on the table to be drafted there, but I agree with you. I think the sort of most obvious selection to be taken over Kelce here was absolutely George Kittle. I mean, you mentioned how good of a player that Travis Kelce is, 6'5", 260. George Kittle, 6'4", 247. And if we look at his player profile on playerprofiler.com, shout out to them, he ranks in the 90th percentile in every single workout metric. He runs a 4.5 40, 96th percentile among tight ends. That's wide receiver speed at 6'4", 247. His speed score adjusted for weight, 95th percentile amongst tight ends. His burst score, 90th percentile. And his agility score is in the 100th percentile. He's the best tight end at being agile. you talk about how Travis Kelce's that safety valve for Patrick Mahomes,
Mm-hmm.
but George Kittle, not only is he the safety valve for Jimmy Garoppolo, he is their entire passing offense.
That's true.
Deebo Samuel, we saw Deebo Samuel go down. I don't know exactly what's up with him. I think it was a foot injury.
Mm-hmm.
That can be crippling for a wide receiver. Other options they have there, they just drafted Brandon Ayuk. I don't know really much about Brandon Ayuk. He went to Arizona State. I never watched him play at all. I don't think it was a bad pick by the Niners, but I just don't know anything about him. So George Kittle is the only real bona fide passing option there. And we see with his speed, his agility, his strength, he can get those yards after the catch. He's not a Mike Gesicki where he's going to break 0 tackles and the amount of targets he's going to get. He's going to catch over 80 balls. He's going to get probably 110, 120 targets, maybe more if the Deebo Samuel injury is worse than we think. And he has the yard after catch ability to go off and break for some 70-yard touchdowns. I mean, this isn't even the Kittle pick here, but I just don't see how you could value Travis Kelce in Dynasty over George Kittle when Kittle has, I think, 4 or 5 years of age on Kelce. Not that Kelce's a bad pick, but I think Kittle in Dynasty has to be tight end 1. So after breaking down those 2 tight ends, at the 209, Sam took Mike Evans, who at the time I actually saw as quite a bit of a faller in this draft. I expected Mike Evans to go right around the 1-2 turn, around that like 201, 202 pick, and partially because PK is a huge Bucks fan and hypes up Mike Evans like nobody else. I mean, if you say anything in our group chat about anyone being better than Mike Evans, he will go off on you.
Remember the Keenan Allen thing? Like when Keenan Allen posted that thing?
He traded Keenan Allen. I remember because I was working at Amazon that day, and the Grand League group chat was popping off, and he was like, "Did you see what Keenan Allen tweeted?" So I just sent him a trade offer for Keenan Allen, and he accepted.
I'm still, yeah, but yeah.
It was hilarious. But yeah, so I expected Mike Evans to go earlier, although looking at it now, if I had taken Mike Evans at the 209 in a Dynasty, even in Dynasty, I would have been absolutely ecstatic. But looking back at it now, I think that's about right, and there are definitely players that went behind Evans who I would have taken over him.
Yeah, same. I mean, when I think about Mike Evans, he's a best ball god, because when you think about it, he had like half his points in 3 games last year. That is horrible. Yep. That is horrible and crippling from a week-to-week basis, but best ball, he's still a pretty good pick. And I know we mentioned this with Godwin, but I truly, truly do not know how Evans is going to do with Brady. I mean, when you look at it, Jameis Winston was just throw it down the field. I don't care who's in triple coverage. I don't care who's down there. If I throw it to a safety, who cares? Brady is not going to be that type of quarterback. Brady is not irresponsible with the football. Brady is the opposite. I don't think Tom Brady will be very good for Mike Evans. I feel like if anybody is the benefactor of Tom Brady coming to New England, it will be Chris Godwin or Ronald Jones. But I don't necessarily hate Mike Evans here. This is probably around where he would have gone. I would have taken probably a lot of the guys that went behind him over him. But I still think he's a good football player, and that's really all you could ask for at the 209.
Yeah, I mean, he's better than a good football player. He's a fantastic football player.
Oh,
I mean,
he's a great player.
His deep ball ability is arguably the best in the NFL. But as you mentioned, he has sort of that issue in a week-to-week fantasy game, which is what we're playing. We're not playing best ball. We're not playing set it and forget it. He produces weeks where he's completely healthy. He's playing 90% of the snaps, and you see him put up less than 10 fantasy points in a PPR league, which is absolutely inexcusable for someone who's probably your wide receiver one. In Sam's case, he has Michael Thomas, so he has that floor with Michael Thomas. But even still, you're getting 5 points, 6 points, 9 points out of your starting wide receiver and second-round pick. It's going to lead to you losing some weeks. Now, obviously, you talk about the reverse effect of that, where he goes for 45 and you beat your opponent by 60 points, and you have a great day, great day in fan. But he's just so inconsistent that personally for me, there's a lot of other guys like this in the NFL. I think Amari Cooper is the first one that also comes to mind, where, yeah, they're going to win you some weeks, but you need a very team around them to compensate if they don't go off just because of the draft capital you're using on them. And Mike Evans is one of those guys. I mean, as a Patriots fan, he actually is pretty underrated when it comes to the deep ball. He's one of the most accurate deep ball quarterbacks in the last few years. But and Bruce Arians' offense, maybe he'll pass the ball downfield a little bit more. But yeah, as you said, I just don't see Brady being like, oh, Mike Evans is down there double covered. I know he can probably go up and get it. But yeah, let's just chuck it deep and see what happens. Like Brady, that's just not how Tom Brady operates. He'd much rather check it down to a Ronald Jones or Derek Goombawala, maybe Keyshawn Vaughn, or find his super mega slot guy, Chris Godwin, over the middle somewhere, or maybe one of those tight ends. Like, he's not going to be chucking it deep to Mike Evans 2 times a week. It's just not going to happen. So I think if Mike Evans is going to be a top 5 fantasy receiver, he's going to need to be an absolutely insane red zone threat and go for like 14 touchdowns. That's the only way I see him being a top 5 fantasy receiver with Brady at the helm.
Yeah. And like you said, I know Eryk probably loves Tom Brady as a Patriots fan, but Tom Brady is going to be good for winning football games. He is not going to be irresponsible. He is not going to be Jameis Winston. I would bet my house that Tom Brady does not go 30 for 30 next year. And then at the 210, I actually ended up picking Jonathan Taylor. The thing about Jonathan Taylor is I just view Taylor as the next Zeke, man. The only people that have a better athletic profile than him at his position are Saquon Barkley and Zeke himself. And he just got drafted to an organization that has shirts and hats printed that say, run the damn ball. So they want to run the damn ball. I know that Marlon Mack went over 1,000 last year. And Marlon Mack, yeah, he's talented, but he's not somebody who I think is going to... He's never a guy who produced in the big way that I think JT is going to. JT, I think in 2021, he's going to be like, I don't want to say the 3rd or 4th or 5th running back off the board, but he's going to be a high first-round pick because we can't guarantee anything. He is still a rookie. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but Jonathan Taylor was just absolutely prolific at Wisconsin. When you are discussed with the likes of Herschel Walker and all the great college running backs, yeah, there's not really much else to say. He had the most rushing yards out of anybody that had only played 3 seasons in college football. Yeah,
he averaged 2,000 rushing yards a season. He averaged more than that. I mean, he's obviously not going to do that in the NFL. No. Wisconsin, I mean, the Colts are not playing like FCS schools for a few weeks in a season. They're still playing NFL opponents, but I completely agree with you in terms of his athletic profile. And I think the Colts, for Dynasty and for their football team, Jonathan Taylor is the absolute perfect fit in their offense. I mean, they have arguably the best offensive line in football behind, in my opinion, my favorite offensive guard to watch in the game, Quentin Nelson, and a bunch of other great pieces on that line. And I go back to player profiler, as you mentioned, his player profile behind basically Saquon and only Zeke. I mean, player profiler, that's his best comparison is Zeke. He has a 99th percentile speed score adjusted for weight, 5'10", 226. You can give him the rock on any down. He will rush for 7 yards probably on that play, maybe more. He has that take it to the house speed. There's nothing not to love about Jonathan Taylor. And I go back to concerns about Kenyan Drake that I had past 2020. For your team, personally, in this Dynasty League, sure, Marlon Mack's still there. But I'm pretty sure his contract's up after the season, and I don't see any reason why the Colts need to keep him around unless they really want a good, solid backup running back behind the guy who's going to become the next transcendent running back in the NFL. Kenyan Drake might do nothing after 2020, But Jonathan Taylor, as you said, probably going to be considered a top 5, top 6 running back after this year. And that's in even season-long leagues. Getting him at the 210 in a Dynasty league, absolutely incredible, especially when you factor in you can match him with Kenyan Drake as the RB2 on your team. It's like, all right, you have Kenyan Drake, who has the upside for this year, and you have Jonathan Taylor, who's probably the next Zeke in the NFL. I mean, there's nothing not to love in Dynasty for Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, and like I said, they are just going to pound the rock. The Brett Coleman, who I know is he gets excited about guys, and he's generally pretty reputable when it comes to scouting. And he said he was a Texans fan himself. Brett Coleman's a Texans fan, and he said that Jonathan Taylor is Arian Foster with rockets strapped to his feet, and he's well built. He's 5'11", I think 230. Which, if I was 5'11", 230, I would not be making this podcast right now if I ran a 4.39. but yeah, people were concerned about Jonathan Taylor's receiving workload while he was still in college. And the only thing I can really say is that Wisconsin does not throw the ball to their running backs very often. I mean, he had 8 receptions, and 26 receptions all 3 years of his college career. So it's not like he can't catch. And I need to pull up his target numbers because I can't be absolutely certain. But I'm pretty sure, yeah, he actually has hands. But like I said with Austin Ekeler, Phillip Rivers is a guy who likes to check it down to his running backs. He's targeted his running backs at a rate of 32% over the course of his career. And I think if Jonathan Taylor can get any sort of passing work, well, I mean, I know he's going to eat in the offense, whether he gets passing work or not. But Jonathan Taylor gets passing work, like adequate passing work, I think maybe a top 4 startup pick next year.
Yeah, I mean, he, compared to Marlon Mack, is definitely the better receiver. They have Nyheim Hines there, who's more of that receiving back, sort of probably will fill the Ekeler role for Phillip Rivers. I mean, who knows how much Phillip Rivers will even pass the ball with having easily the best offensive line he's ever had in his career. Unquestionably. I mean, the Chargers had a terrible line his entire career, which has probably led to Austin Ekeler being a good player in the NFL in the first place. But, yeah, you talk about these Wisconsin running backs. The last really good Wisconsin running back we saw was Melvin Gordon. And if I'm not mistaken, he was not viewed as a receiving back in the slightest. Yeah, Melvin Gordon had 22 receptions at Wisconsin. In 4 years, he had 22 receptions. Jonathan Taylor had more than that all of just last year. So if we're talking about guys coming from Wisconsin that aren't necessarily viewed as great receiving backs, this isn't an A.J. Dillon where he caught literally like 0 balls his entire college career. And has proven time and again that like he has rocks for hands. Jonathan Taylor has that skill. The problem is Wisconsin just didn't need to use it.
Yeah.
Because he's rushing for 2,000 yards I mean, there's no point in throwing him the ball when you can just give him the ball and he's still going to average 6 yards a clip on the ground. There's nothing not to love about Jonathan Taylor. I mean, we've been talking about it for like the last 10 minutes, and just a fantastic Dynasty pick. You can't really go. There's nothing else to say.
Yep. And then at the 211, the guy we spent 10 minutes probably talking about a little bit ago is George Kittle. Now, Josh took George Kittle with the expectation that he was Dynasty tight end 1, and I think Josh is absolutely correct. I mean, that entire offense runs through George Kittle. His blocking is so good that it's basically like having another offensive lineman on the field. I know San Fran's a pretty run-heavy team, but, you know, when they do throw the ball, I mean, there was a game last year where yes, I understand that the Cardinals' defense was terrible, but Jimmy Garoppolo threw for like 350 and 4 touchdowns against them. So George Kittle is Jimmy Garoppolo's security blanket. It's not like they're a bad passing offense. It's just that they are run first, and George Kittle just got an extension, and he's a tight end, but he's getting paid like a mid-tier, or not a mid-tier wide receiver. He's getting paid similarly to the likes of Adams, Thielen, so like guys that aren't making top-tier money, but since he's a tight end, they get a little bit of a discount. I personally believe the extension for Kittle was an absolute steal. you can go ahead and watch that video. But yeah, George Kittle at 211, I'd be smashing that all day.
Yeah, I would too. And yeah, we talked about him for a lot. So there's not really much to say. Kittle is the best player in that division at any position. Maybe Russell Wilson. Sorry.
Yeah.
But we'll,
it's okay.
Regardless. But
or
Kittle,
Aaron Donald.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, okay. Never mind. I lied. It's okay. All right, yeah. Aaron Donald, second best player in football. But moving on to the 212, Andres had this pick, and to pair with his already great core of Jacobs and DJ Moore, he went and took Lamar Jackson, who, as we know, had an absolutely historic campaign at quarterback last season. Mm-hmm. Just blew everyone out of the water in terms of QB scoring. Would have been the most impressive fantasy player in most years, if not for the fact that Christian McCaffrey had probably the best fantasy season of all time, and Michael Thomas broke the receptions leaderboard. So the three of them were kind of a three-headed monster in PPR scoring last year in terms of being head and shoulders above like QB2, RB2, wide receiver 2. But we talked about the issues with taking a quarterback in a one-quarterback league. And obviously Lamar Jackson is just a quarterback we've really never seen before. People bring up comparisons to Michael Vick. Lamar Jackson's better at football than Michael Vick was. Mm-hmm. That's just a fact. I mean, Michael Vick never threw for 35 touchdowns in a season. He probably wasn't as fast. I mean, Lamar Jackson just breaks the game of football. The problem that I have with Lamar Jackson in the Dynasty League is I have no idea how long it's going to last. He's really athletic. He's basically a running back at the quarterback position. But if he continues to play like that, I just don't know how long he's going to be a top-tier fantasy quarterback.
Yeah. A few things to say about Lamar Jackson. So I remember last offseason, people were making memes about, like, oh, he's a running back. And then the first game against the Dolphins, John Harbaugh, excuse me.
Yeah, one of the Harbaughs.
Yeah, John Harbaugh came in with the idea that they wanted to shut people the fuck up about Lamar Jackson not being able to throw. And drafting this guy in the 11th round for me did me wonders. It was just so insane that I was the beneficiary in the big league of having Lamar Jackson. It was just great. I loved being able to set and forget. I felt like he was a guy who I could just rely on every week for at least 25. He ended up winning me some games with some garbage time touchdowns even. Now, I ended up losing the league because I traded Dalvin Cook for him mid-November. But that's neither here nor there. In Superflex leagues, I believe Lamar Jackson goes around the 104, 105. And, man, the rushing upside for Lamar Jackson in a Dynasty league is just completely ridiculous. I mean, if you separated his passing and rushing stats, he was a QB1 and RB1. And I found a stat last year that says Lamar Jackson last year had 7 games worth 30 or more fantasy points, the most by any quarterback in a single season ever. The only 3 players at any position to have had more were Marshall Faulk, Priest Holmes, and LaDainian Tomlinson, who had 9 games worth 30-plus fantasy points. So Lamar Jackson last year was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I know I went off, like, when we were talking about the Mahomes pick, about how, like, you have to question whether it's worth it or not. But, you know, if Lamar Jackson can come even close to what he did last year, I think this is more than a worthy late second round pick in a 1 QB league.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that it's probably worth it if he's able to continue this production for more than 5 years. He hasn't sustained an injury yet, and I don't want to say he's going to get injured because that's just not something you want to say. But it is the NFL, and the fact of the matter is basically every single guy sustains at least 1 or more injuries over their career. It's just too physical a sport to not get hurt. But yeah, as you said, his fantasy production was absolutely off the charts. I cannot wait for this NFL season, if it happens and if both guys are healthy, to see the MVP race between Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. I get betting on dark horse candidates, but if Patrick Mahomes is 5,050 and Lamar Jackson's 2019 MVP season are any indication, it would be a waste of money to bet on any other MVP for the NFL this season. They are just too good at football. Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback talent we've ever seen, and Lamar Jackson is the most physically gifted in terms of running quarterbacks that we've ever seen. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to repeat their production the next two seasons, both, or not next two seasons, from the last two seasons. Obviously, I was referring to each of their respective MVP seasons, but it's going to be incredible to see who puts up more fantasy points. It's going to be incredible to see who wins league MVP. Both of these guys are on incredibly successful NFL teams, so I just can't wait for the QB battles that are sure to happen in the AFC for the next decade. But yeah, their fantasy outlooks look absolutely incredible over the next few years. And moving on to the 213, whose fantasy outlook for the next few years looks potentially less than incredible. This is where you go from seeing Grand League as a league of pretty smart fantasy guys to what the fuck is happening.
Oh my god.
Darren Waller at the 213 is the worst pick I've ever seen in the first two rounds of fantasy. That includes I'd rather take a shot at Antonio Brown, not knowing everything that happened. If you teleported, not knowing he didn't play the whole season, but not knowing anything about the past year, I would go back and draft Antonio Brown in the second 100 out of 100 times over taking Darren Waller in a dynasty draft. This pick, it's perplexing to me. And it's not even that I don't like Darren Waller, because where he's going in normal drafts around the 6th, 7th round is actually really good value for how good of a player he is. I mean, probably behind Kittle, Kelce, and Mark Andrews, the fourth most athletically gifted tight end. And I mean, he's probably a great player. I didn't really watch too many Raiders games. I know the stats. He put up really good receiving numbers, and his touchdown numbers could even improve. But as someone who doesn't really like taking early tight ends in the first place, taking a mid-round tight end that belongs in the 6th round and putting him at the end of the 2nd round is absolutely asinine.
Yeah, this is, as you mentioned, this has to be the worst fantasy pick I have ever seen. Because when you think about it, like you said, when we were talking about this a few weeks ago off camera, you said that if he took Mark Andrews, oh yeah, it's a bit of a reach, but he shouldn't get shit on for it. This is just a bad pick any way you look at it. Darren Waller could be a top 5 tight end for the next 3 or 4 years, and I would still just absolutely hate this pick. Because if you really, really want Darren Waller, he would have been there in the 6th round. I was able to get Mark Andrews in the 6th round. There is no way that our league would have drafted. I know we have picks like this happen sometimes.
I don't know if you can put up the draft board on the screen in this video, but you look at PK's next 3 picks, or next 4 picks, because that's around where he was going. He took Terry McLaurin in the 3rd round. Good pick. Deshaun Watson at the end of the 4th. Not a pick I can argue with. Keenan Allen in the 5th. Again, not a pick I'm going to be terribly annoyed about. I see, what was this? The 609. He took Damian Williams. That's right where I see Darren Waller going in a fantasy draft. If I'm going to be perfectly... Noah Fant went at the 607, which was way too early, even in a Dynasty League. I'm sorry. But yeah. Darren Waller, as a 27-year-old tight end, probably the tight end 4 or 5 in Dynasty. The same round that Mark Andrews went in. Keep in mind, Mark Andrews fell to the 6th round in our league. Good pick, Alex, by the way.
Thank you.
But that would be the spot to draft Darren Waller.
Yeah, this is just not a pick anybody can get behind. We were having a draft Zoom call because this is when quarantine was at its peak, when Zoom was still a big deal, and we were all just shocked. I was shocked because this is just, like I said, this is just a horrible pick any way you look at it. Darren Waller was the only passing option on the Raiders last year, unless you want to include Tyrell Williams as a legitimate passing option. But what did they do this year? They drafted Henry Ruggs, Lynn Bowden, and Brian Edwards all in the top 3 rounds. So it is very clear that they want to get Derek Carr some help. And Derek Carr, I think he gets shit on too much, but I don't see him supporting a bunch of guys and just a guy they picked off. I mean, I know they extended him, but also they picked him up off the street. I don't know what to say. I just don't.
There's nothing to say about this pick. I mean, you can say all the good things you want about Darren Waller. Actually, it's someone who I, again, mentioned I like taking in the 6th round if you were going to take a tight end there. But, and like, there's good things to say about Darren Waller. He was, the 3rd best tight end in PPR last year.
Yeah. He's a good football player.
6'6", 255. He's 6'6", 255, and he's really fast. He's like George Kittle without the blocking, and maybe a little bit worse. But the problem is that he just doesn't really get targeted like George Kittle does, and he's also 27. It's not like he's a Noah Fant who's this like young emerging guy who should be able to dominate the NFL. Like, he's already 27. And again, you mentioned the issues he had with substance abuse and stuff that he was awesome for him, able to get overcome and become an NFL star basically overnight. But those first few years of his career that he missed, if he was still 24, maybe I like this pick a little more, because then he's like a Mark Andrews, where Mark Andrews is just going to get better and he's going to get older and more. Like, Darren Waller's in his prime. He's not going to get better than what he was last year, as much as you might want him to. He might stay the same for a few years, but he's not improving. And to draft Darren Waller in the 2nd round, you're going to need him to be better than what he was if you're taking him 2 picks after George Kittle and 6 picks after Travis Kelce. There's nothing more to say.
You know what? The only thing obviously you can't predict your draft, but I think if I were PK, I would have just traded up 2 picks and gotten the tight end 1, as opposed to reaching 4 rounds for like the tight end 5, 6, maybe even 7.
Yeah, he did explain his draft strategy to me actually before the draft, and he really wanted a tight end. So it may have been where he saw Kittle falling to him, and he went 2 picks earlier, so he didn't really have much time to pivot, and he was just so dead set on getting that tight end. So he's like, all right, default. Who's the tight end 3? Darren Waller, draft. And it's one of those decisions that's just like, if you could do it again, you would every time. But again, even Mark Andrews there, it would have been bad, but it wouldn't have been this bad.
Yep. And the only thing that makes it even worse is a guy who has shot up draft boards this year was taken at the 214. The Miles Sanders hype train has been rolling, just rolling all along. And the funny thing is, I actually expected Sanders to be my pick at 205, but Mixon was a pure value play. And if I did it again, I don't know who I'd take, to be quite honest. But Miles Sanders, he's now being drafted in the late 1st, early 2nd round of startups, and there's nothing more to say than that's absolutely where he should be going. You know, he was a league winner last year. He was the RB3 from I don't know when to I don't know when, because we've just thrown so many of those out there this video. But Miles Sanders is legit. I know people have concerns about Peterson not using a workhorse, but when I think about it, they have brought in absolutely nobody to take the workload off of Sanders. And that was a concern of mine around the time we were drafting, but all Peterson has said all offseason is that they want to feed Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders is likely going to be someone he's going to be like Aaron Jones, where he gives up some of the rushing work, but absolutely dominates in the receiving game.
Yeah, as you said, nothing to not love about Miles Sanders. At the time, I was looking at the ESPN rankings, which we actually drafted on ESPN before moving our league over to Sleeper. I had the 303 and the 304, which when we break down the 3rd round, I'll talk about. But I was very, very excited at the potential of getting Miles Sanders at one of those 2 picks, just because that's where he was going in the
Mhm.
ESPN ranking. Like every fantasy website, because we drafted in May before even a lot of the Dynasty rankings were finalized, that's where he was. And I was like, oh man, I absolutely love Miles Sanders. I didn't see him as a first round pick just because of where he was ranked. I mean, I'm not a ranking slave where I'm like, oh, this guy's going here, so I need to draft him here. But that's just kind of where I had him. I was like, oh, our late second round pick based on our league mates, he'll hopefully fall. And Yoav, who considered actually taking him at the 113, got him a full round later than that. It was just absolutely insane. Since the Jordan Howard injury, he was the RB3 for the rest of the season. Absolutely crazy production that he put up once Howard was out of there. And as you mentioned, absolutely zero backfield competition other than Boston Scott, maybe. But the thing about Boston Scott is that they actually used him. He got 6 targets a game last year when Miles Sanders was being the RB3, and Miles Sanders was still getting 5 targets a game. So he's still getting plenty of passing work, and Boston Scott is not going to rush the ball more than twice a game. No. He's just not. Like Miles Sanders, the goal line work is his. He's still going to get his passing work, and there's no reason why he shouldn't be an absolute beast. He's only, 23? Yeah, it was his rookie year last year. So someone who I was honestly very high on last year as well, and I tried to scoop up in as many leagues as possible. But, yeah, I mean, what's not to love about Miles Sanders?
Yeah, and like you said, the Jordan Howard injury was really, really... I think in an interview he said that the Jordan Howard injury was really what helped him propel his game to the next level. If I remember correctly, he wasn't that great for fantasy or in real life. Like, I was watching All or Nothing with the Eagles, and he didn't really turn on the gas until late in the season when they were making their playoff run, and people were saying, oh, the NFC East is a horrible division, which that is true, but Miles Sanders absolutely carried them. You know, they lost all their passing options. I think even in the playoff game, Carson Wentz ended up getting cheap shotted by Quonnie, and there's not really much else to say other than Miles Sanders basically was the guy who carried them to a playoff berth, and they took him in the second round, so that tells you that they want to use him. They want him to be a big part of this offense, and he will be.
Yeah, and obviously not really related to our draft, but just another fantasy breakdown before we wrap things up here. I see the Miles Sanders of this year for 2020 as J.K. Dobbins. I mean, you talk about a huge, prolific program that they went to. I think J.K. Dobbins probably even a little bit more highly regarded coming out of college than Miles Sanders was. Miles Sanders, PSU guy. J.K. Dobbins coming out of Ohio State, both very, very good college football programs. But maybe they weren't given the entire keys to the offense just because of how good their teams were. But going in the second round, you got sort of a older ground and pound style running back ahead of them. I think, obviously, I'm not comparing Mark Ingram skill-wise to Jordan Howard. He's a far better back, and the Ravens are just a better team than the Eagles in general. But Mark Ingram's old, and if Mark Ingram gets hurt at any point this year, it will be the J.K. Dobbins show in Baltimore. Undoubtedly. I mean, he's just arguably he's better than Mark Ingram right now. You could argue it. I mean, you don't know necessarily. I haven't seen Ravens training camp, obviously, but J.K. Dobbins might be more talented now, as apparently Miles Sanders was more talented than Jordan Howard. And I don't think the Ravens are so inclined on using a RBBC like the Eagles were for many years. So just an eye out for fantasy, both in season long and dynasty. J.K. Dobbins is my Miles Sanders pick this year.
Yep, and if Mark Ingram goes down, he is not getting his backfield back. That's just how it is. And you know who's going to be the beneficiary in the Grand League of J.K. Dobbins popping off? Colorado, baby.
It will be you. It will be you. Yeah, your team's just set up for success.
But yeah, that's going to do it, guys. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed. I know this was a very, very, very long video, but props to you if you stuck around for all of this. Also, one more thing I want to add like, I wanted to add it when we were talking about Lamar Jackson, but I couldn't find a chance to. Young quarterbacks that have a chance to be a breakout QB1 that are relatively inexpensive right now. Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Gardner Minshew. If you're in a Superflex league and you need a straight up, like, flat out dart throw, Justin Herbert, PJ Walker, maybe in redraft I'd throw in Tua there too, and Dwayne Haskins. So is there anything else you want to say before we wrap this up, Eryk?
No, I mean, just adding to that point about late round QBs, I talked about how much that Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes actually burst onto the scene with their MVP seasons. Prior to those MVP seasons, where they were by far and away QB1 in fantasy, both of them were going at the middle to end of drafts. I mean, you took Lamar Jackson last year. I remember 3 or 4 picks before I was planning on it.
Yeah,
I obviously waited around too long, as we found out, but I was huge on Lamar Jackson as a sleeper QB. I wasn't expecting him to do what he did.
I don't think anyone was, but yeah.
Again, these late round flyer QBs, and I'm not saying Daniel Jones is the next Patrick Mahomes, but look for the value where other people don't see it. Look for that emerging offense like Drew Lock has. It's not that hard to find, and a team that wants to put their QB in a place to succeed, and that has obviously proven they put the talent around that QB to succeed. I think Drew Lock is probably my pick in terms of the offense improving. Yeah. But yeah, guys like Daniel Jones, the Giants want to use Daniel Jones. The Broncos want to use Drew Lock. It's just these obvious picks that people don't see every year. And it's obviously, all right, you take an early QB, you don't need one of these guys necessarily. But if you're like us and you take late QB and 1 QB, don't be taking Phillip Rivers or Tyrod Taylor. Look for these young QBs, take them around earlier. Because your team should still be good if you have to take a QB in the 9th instead of the 10th.
Yeah, if I'm being honest, I know Dynasty leagues are deep. I'd prefer, PJ Walker in the last round as opposed to Phillip Rivers in, the 13th and 1 QB. I'd rather just have that dart throw. So, yeah, I think that's going to do it for the video. Anything you want to say, Eryk?
No, I'm good.
All right, yeah.
Yeah,
so
thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, so leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you are not already, follow me and Eryk on Twitter, link will be up there or in the description below. Anyways, guys, have a good day, and peace out.
I can never ever find the right words, and there's no way this is real life. There's no telling you're the right girl, so I can only say that it feels right. It feels right, it feels right. Yeah, I can only say that it feels right.